Everyone, I'm Paul Ostrow, and I'm very pleased to be moderating a series of Civic Caucus interviews. The topic is how do we restore faith in our Minnesota institutions? We're really excited about this series for a number of reasons. One is that we are bringing future leaders together with policy veterans, and we're bringing forward some wonderful speakers who can talk to us about times when there was more trust in Minnesota institutions and Minnesota institutions were able to respond to solve community problems. And I can't think of a better person to talk to about how institutions in the past have solved problems than our speaker or interviewee tonight. We are pleased to have with us tonight T. Williams. T is a longtime community leader. He was a founder of the Urban Coalition. He served as executive director of the Phyllis Wheatley Settlement House. He was the first ombudsman for corrections in the state of Minnesota, a Bush Fellow, a member of the Minneapolis School Board, and most recently, T wrote and has published Rewind, Rewind Lessons from 50 Years of Activism. So T, we're thrilled to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm introducing, our panel of interviewers tonight. First of all, we are really pleased to be joined by Ipshita Tiwari. Ipshita is a member of the Eden Prairie High School class of 2027, an accomplished member of the speech class, or our speech team for Eden Prairie. Her rival from Minnetonka also joins us tonight. We're pleased to have Sam Krishnamurthy. Sam is a member of the Minnetonka High School Congress team and also represents youth on the Minnesota Youth Council and is going to graduate in 2028. So we look for great things for the two of you. We actually have the two executive directors of the Civic Caucus joining us as our policy veterans. Paul Gilje comes to us as a highly respected policy veteran who served in a leadership role with the Citizens League and has been a longtime executive director for the Civic Caucus. Paul, we're thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
You bet. And then Janis Clay.
I asked you to tell them.
Janis Clay shares with Paul and myself that we are all oldies, so that gives us a leg up on everybody. Having just celebrated our 45th college reunion, Janis, you and I. Janis Clay is the current executive director of the Civic Caucus, an accomplished policy veteran in her own right as well, and really has led us through a new phase of the Civic Caucus and has really helped us move on in these new interviews that we have. This is the third of those interviews. T, I'm going to start with a very broad question, not expecting that you'll cover all of this, maybe just spend a few minutes if you could, and then I want to open it up to questioning. The question I have for you, T, is what are the biggest lessons that you feel your community activism can teach people like Ipshita and Sam, our future leaders? What are some of the biggest lessons that you think they should take from your experience?
Well, thanks, Paul, for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on our discussion this evening. Now, I think that the thing that has been most helpful to me is to have as many voices engaged from as many different directions as possible. That is, to have your I've been more successful in moving forward on ideas or issues when there has been a diverse group of people discussing the issues. People who brought a perspective that was different from mine, because I have a tendency to want to push what I believe is the right thing to do on others, because I think my experience is superior to those of others. So leave me to my own devices. I'm going to push through what I think might be in the best interests of others. But if I'm surrounded by people who might bring something different to the table, who have had experiences different from mine, my experiences have been early in my life were of course were very limited, because I was isolated a great deal. Grew up in the South. Went to segregated schools, so what my views were limited to that environment. And so as I moved out of that environment, I saw that there were other people who saw things a little differently than I did, and were willing to share those views with me. And so I learned from that. I experienced early on in my life, after leaving Mississippi, a great deal of culture shock in two different environments. And whereas it shocked me, I was able to see different perspectives, that there were people who lived different lives than I did, and that they weren't better, they were different. And that's what I had to really come to the grip with, that things can be different and not be better or worse, but be different, and accept that they're different. So what I've learned to do really over time is to accept difference, and to interact with that and see what I can learn from it, and whether there's always my experience. There's always been a lesson that out of those experiences, something I can take from it that can help me move from the place where I may have been standing at that time.
Great. Thank you, T. Great place to start, the willingness to learn from others. Ipshita, why don't you jump in with a question?
Yeah, so I guess what I'm really intrigued by is, could you recall, like, what was your experience like growing up in the South, juxtaposed with moving to the Midwest in your late teens, is what I've learned.
Well, I'm an old man now. I celebrated my 91st birthday on May 16th. So I lived in the South when it was totally segregated, separate and unequal, in a different environment. So there were two things I had to learn to do. I had to learn to survive in my own environment, which had its own challenges. And then I had to learn to survive in that other environment, because that was the one that was really making all of the decisions that impacted my life. And I had to do it in a way that I was able to survive. So that there were things that if you were Black and living in Mississippi at the time that I was, that you learned the things you could do and that you could not do, and that you, at least in my case and from my family and our point of view, you could not do them not because you could not do them. You could not do them because there was something standing in your way, an obstacle, someone else who was controlling the environment. So what you had to do is to learn how to manipulate that in such a way that you could take on the advantages that would help you and not hurt you, and always thinking that things will get better. See, what we grew up with in our faith and everything was always looking beyond where you were, and my family and others around me, to that there's going to be a better day someday, but being a young person growing up in that, some days seem to be so far away, and that sometimes not very acceptable. And so there was always that situation where you didn't want to accept it, but the alternative to not accepting it at that point in time was not one that anyone wanted to contemplate. But I was able to move beyond that, and moving beyond that had to be, it meant that I totally extricated myself from that environment. I migrated. I was one of the participants in the Great Migration, where Black folks were leaving the South. And I left and went as far away from this Mississippi as I could get, all the way to Portland, Maine. And that was a different world, one that was strange for me. And I was wondering at times how I might survive. But you learn survival skills when you're growing up, when you're exposed to the kind of environment I was exposed to there, and found out again that things were different in Maine, but not necessarily better. So I had to learn how to relate to that difference, and also look for advantages in it. But and also believe in myself that I was a whole person that could do a lot of things that some people didn't expect I was able to do. And so surviving that environment and being a Black kid, 16 years old, going to a community where everybody else around you mostly was white, and where your experiences with white people were ones that you had, they really were the enemy in a sense. For in many ways, they control your environment. At least they did in Mississippi. So that I had to learn to approach with caution, but also had to be clever enough to be able to make my way through, and find time and places where I could get my confidence in myself could be enhanced. And I had teachers, both Black and white teachers, that helped instill that in me. In Mississippi, my teachers were all Black. And after I left Mississippi, I did not see or experience another Black teacher until I was in graduate school. And that also included my going to a literally all Black high school in Chicago, where the students were all Black, but the teachers were not. And so it was my fortune or misfortune to have classes with all non-Black teachers. So it would be quite some time for me to experience that. But early in my life, my Black teachers were ones that helped put me on put me in a good direction. And also, I was a kid when I was growing up that I thought I was smarter than everyone else. And in many cases in my class, I always was smarter. And I also knew how to manipulate the teachers, and thought that I should get my way with everything until I had a 5th grade teacher that turned me around. We used to have school plays, and I was in the play, and I expected to get the lead role. And this was in the 5th grade, and I went in, and my teacher gave me a part with about 5 lines, and I, gave it back to her and said that, I'm better than that. If I can't have a bigger role in the play, I don't want to be in it. And she said, "Thank you. You will not be in it." And that was the last time I challenged the teacher to say that, look, if I can't have this, then I'm going to do that. And that was a great lesson for me.
That is a
and
political
I
lesson in there too,
to
T.
this day,
So wonderful. Yeah. Do you have any follow-up, Ipshita, to that, or?
Yeah, I just have one follow-up question is, you mentioned earlier on experiencing some kind of like a culture shock, especially when you arrived in the Midwest as you participated in the Great Migration. Um, so I was just curious to know what were some of these culture shocks that you experienced, especially being so far from home?
Yeah, well, the first thing I left Mississippi. We left my a brother that's a couple of years older than myself. We left together on a Greyhound bus. So we rode from the Mississippi Delta, the northern part of Mississippi, all the way to Portland, Maine on a Greyhound bus. It took us about 4 or 5 days. Well, I'd never been around. There were 1,800 people in my little town in Mississippi. About 1,750 of them were Black. And I got to Portland, and I attended a high school there that was the size. I was a junior in high school. The size of I had as many people in the high school almost as I had in my town. So there were 1,698 students in my high school, and I think there were about 10 or 12 students of color. Not all of them were Black. So every time I attended a class, I was the lone Black kid in the class. I had to get used to that. And I wasn't overwhelmed by the academic side of it because as I said, I was the smartest kid in my class in Mississippi, although I wasn't the smartest one when I got to Portland. But I had an English teacher, Mr. Smith, in his class, and I had to do more reading there than we had books in Mississippi, and had to do book reports and oral and written. And he took me aside. He saw that I was a little anxious. He took me aside and he said that, look, I would really appreciate it if when you do your book report that you would report on Black authors, because these students will never pick up a book that is written by a Black person. Some of them wouldn't pick it up if they knew it was written by a Black person, for sure. Others wouldn't pick it up if they thought it was. So this is an opportunity for you to help me, he said, educate your fellow students. And so I was really overwhelmed by that, and I did, and I selected authors that they had never heard of before and stories that they would never take through. So that was one experience there in Portland. But when I got to Chicago, I was at a school that was all Black, except one. We had a Chinese student there. And my experience there, the culture shock was just as great in that environment as it was in Portland, because in Chicago, it seemed like my fellow students there were speaking a different language. It was the urban slang and the street language. And I came from Mississippi to the extent where that slang or dialect, it was rural. And I couldn't understand what they were talking about. So I didn't talk to anyone for about a month until I learned the language. For example, I'm talking to a kid and he's asking me a question that I really thought was totally out of context of what we were talking about. He asked me if I own a short. And we were talking about something else, and I thought he was asking me if I own a cigarette, and I didn't smoke. And in Mississippi, we saw the short, the cigarette, someone was come up to and said, save me a drag off of your cigarette, the short, that means the short end, the butt of the cigarette. But what this kid was talking about was a car, an automobile. In the 50s, in Chicago in particular, and some of the other northern cities, they referred to automobiles as shorts. And I picked up other language, like they referred to where they live. Kids would be talking and say, I'm going to my crib. And in Mississippi, a crib was a place where we stored cotton or corn, and I said, this is weird. I don't know where these folks are coming from. But it was some of that I had to get used to. And it took me some time. And I went slow, and I knew I had been accepted in the high school in Chicago when I was invited into the lunchroom where I'd never been before, and I was seated at the table with what I refer to as the two Barbaras and Shirley. The two Barbaras and Shirley were the three best looking girls in my high school, and I was invited to join their table. So
Wow.
that was my acceptance at that school.
You really arrived at that point.
I'd arrived, you know.
Wow. Sam, there's a lot to follow up. I'm going to see what you would like to ask T.
Yeah, I just would like to take a minute to thank you, Coach Paul, as well as Civic Caucus, for this opportunity. And thank you, Mr. Williams, for your time today. Honestly, all of the work you've done on activism in our community is just truly inspiring for youth in the community and specifically youth of minority communities. So my question, kind of just looking into all of your leadership roles and how much you've contributed to activism here in Minnesota, just thinking about myself as a youth, I'm a girl of color, and I think keeping that in mind and also keeping in mind that I'm really interested in being a leader and representing my community, I truly understand one of the huge issues minority groups and people of color face are having to tackle barriers towards playing a leadership role in their community. So my question really is how can we as a community come together to help uplift minority youth voices, encourage advocacy and initiative, as well as foster an environment where diversity is incorporated into these leadership roles?
Well, I came to Minnesota in 1965. We had this, my oldest child was just 18 months old, and I had not, before coming to Minnesota, I really was not involved in the community. I was not active. I went to my job, I did that, and then I'd come home from the job to work, and stuff that was going on around me, I was concerned about it, but I was really not engaged in trying to do anything about it, because living in Chicago, the price I would have had to pay to become socially active in Chicago was beyond what I wanted to pay. And that was, Chicago at that time was controlled by the late Richard Daley, the mayor. Everything went through him, and it was a situation where they dictated to us how you should vote, and you had to go through people to see other people. In order to get to the mayor, there were probably about 4 or 5 people in between you and the mayor, and you had to know someone who knew someone who knew someone to get there. And working in the community, you had to, if you were going to be socially active, you had to be politically active, and politically active gave you one choice, was through that Democratic machine in Chicago. And I was not into politics at that time. Came to Minneapolis. That was not our plan. My wife is from Philadelphia, and she didn't like Chicago, and she wanted to get out of Chicago. So when I was offered a job in Minneapolis, it was not taking us back toward Philadelphia, but it was getting us out of Chicago. So we came here. And what I discovered when I got here, I came to a settlement house, which was right in the community, and the expectation of working at the settlement house, it was Unity Settlement, which no longer exists, is that you were a part of the community, that you became engaged, you became involved, and you went to meetings. Before I got to Minneapolis, I'd never gone to a meeting that wasn't connected with the church or something like that, or my fraternity, and other meetings not about what was going on in the community. We got here, and part of my job at the settlement house was to be out in the community. And the thing that I discovered was easy to meet and get to know people. I met the mayor, who was Art Naflin at the time, within my first 3 months here. and met his wife before I met him because she was on one of the settlement houses board. Well, that got me involved and engaged, and I began to meet people who their professionally were similar to me in that regard, but they came from different backgrounds, different faiths, and different racial backgrounds and so on. But I began to meet people that I never would have met before, and I became active in what was going on around me, and began to attend neighborhood meetings, became concerned about the political process here. Always voted, but voting here was different from voting in Chicago. Voting in Chicago was prescribed. Voting here, you made up your own mind and decided whom you wanted to support. So I became socially active and involved after we got to Chicago and working at the settlement house Unity, and then later was ambushed by three women, one Jewish woman and two African American women, who told me that they wanted me to be the executive director at Phyllis Wheatley because Phyllis Wheatley's executive had taken a similar job across the river in St. Paul at Hallie Q. Brown. And they wanted me to become the executive director there. And I told them I couldn't do that because I had promised my boss over there that I would be there for at least 2 years. Well, they had already talked to her about my coming over there, coming to Phyllis Wheatley. And so I told them I can't do it, but if you want to invite me to an interview, send me a letter and I'll come get my information from my wife. And so, to make a long story short, I was appointed the executive director at Phyllis Wheatley. This was we'd been in Minneapolis for 8 months at that time, and these people at Phyllis Wheatley entrusted this 31-year-old at the time and to put him in charge of this iconic community agency that meant a great deal to the community, especially the African American community. And I had never run anything before in my life. I had I worked for the welfare department in Chicago. I was a supervisor. I had 6 people in my unit that I supervised. I never put together an institutional budget or anything like that. And yet they entrusted that organization to me. And I thought at that time, I thought I could do anything. And they gave it to me. And I said, well, I know what to do. I'm in charge. And I went off running, and the board, I had a board of directors. I didn't know what that was. I knew it was the people that I talked to, but I thought I was in charge. And one of the first things that I did, I went to a board meeting, and we didn't have a quorum. And that got me upset. In fact, it made me mad, and I wanted to do something about it. So what I did is I came back and I sat down and I wrote a letter, and I didn't show it to anybody, certainly not to my wife.
Bad idea, T. I read the book.
Yeah. To my wife, she would have said no. Well, what happened is that a little woman that weighed less than 100 pounds came into my office, a white woman, and she took my letter and she smashed it down on my desk, and she read me out. And then she told me what my approach should have been, and that she became my mentor on that board. And then I learned how to run an organization. And the other thing that I know, and advice that I would give to the young people in particular, anything, is that build networks. You can't know too many people from different backgrounds and perspectives. Get to know as many people as you can, and don't have them all be the same like you, because you aren't going to learn much from someone that's just like
networking.
You already know that.
Yeah, really important. So, Sam, do you have a follow-up for T?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I do, because I think it was really important how you talked about just having that network, but also just following up on leadership in general. And I was wondering, because I feel like right now there are a lot of uncertainty. And I feel like just looking at the increase of hate crimes and the increase of gun violence, especially at schools, how can we support overwhelmed students and like youth and minority communities? Because like I feel like personally for me, as well as a lot of my peers, feeling overwhelmed really acts as a barrier towards getting being a leader in the community because there's just too much going on. So how exactly can we support our peers and other students?
Yeah. Well, I want to make two different comments on that. If I truly knew the answers to that question that you are asking, you wouldn't be asking it now because we will have already done something about it. So my point is that what you have to do is to get out and try many different things. And the thing that you really have to have is in this instance, you heard the term that patience is a virtue, but no, patience here is a necessity. That you really do have to be patient, and it's going to take time, and you have to learn how to deal with disappointment because things that you will try are not always going to work out. But don't let the fact that the first time you tried that it didn't work out, don't let that stop you. You have to try it again and again. And you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. You have to, have people working with you. And if you need people that bring to the table different perspectives. And you want people that are willing to work. And it's important that you need people working with you who are not always concerned about who gets the credit for what is done. That if you're not worried overly concerned about who gets credit for what is done, then much more will get done, and that you want people in your group, as I said, that bring to the table different perspectives and that are willing to take risks. And if someone tells you, well, we've never done that before, well, don't let that stop you. Do it, or at least try. And you'll be surprised with some of the things that you tried that you get done and without as much difficulty as someone told you it would be because you tried it.
Great. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Ipshita. Also, Paul Gilje.
Yes, T. Williams, it impressed me to no end to hear the questions from the two younger people the last few minutes. I want to thank Janis Clay and Paul Ostrow for taking the leadership in elevating their work and indicate the great confidence you have in the future based on these kind of questions that were asked tonight with great wisdom and knowledge and background and interest. Paul, I want to say to T, however, that T, I think your book is a phenomenal contribution to the understanding of what's going on, and further, the fact that you yourself are committed to this day as still a young 91-year-old to making a difference. You are not a symbol, you are making a difference. And that permeates every page of your book. And I want to thank you for it. It is number one, I shouldn't say number one, but your book is darn interesting. It is something that people want to continue to read. It's not, at least at my level, it's sure I could understand it. Second, T, it's very thorough. You have told your life story in a marvelous way. It is concise. It doesn't take any time to read it. You can read this in no time. At the same time, it's clearly thorough, it's understanding, and it's, as I said, it's darn interesting. And those are very good. And I think it indicates to me that your commitments in terms of patience, being constructive, being humble and hard-nosed at the same time, marvelous. And you're inclusive, optimistic, persistent, and telling great stories involving real people. I mean, it just amazed me when I heard Fran Naftalin's name mentioned, or Min Himmelman, Randy Halverson, John Coles, my first boss. It was just great fun to hear those things. So let me then say to you, if you could briefly respond, T, to just this question: what do you think is your main objective in life?
Well, what I was thinking about, Paul, when I wrote the book, because it didn't start out to write a book. What I started out to do was that I was afraid that some of these people who were making these great contributions, that they were going to pass on and no one will have had their stories. And so I was collecting a group of oral histories that could be deposited somewhere for the future for someone else to look up and write about them, But what I was seeing is that, in my life, throughout my professional career at any rate, that I had been involved in working with institutions. I was at, and they've always been on either the public or the nonprofit end of it. And these have been places where we were concerned about. I understood what the purpose of the institution, what the organization was, its mission, and I was putting all of my energy and resources toward trying to grow that, achieve the mission, and grow the organization, and build community. And what is so frustrating for me now is I see so much of the efforts to destroy institutions, that the mission, or to devour the mission of them, so that they do not work to accomplish what they were originally intended to do. And because with strong institutions, we build strong community, and people, the focus is on having people and institutions in place. So when people need help, when they're need help the most, that there are places that they can go to seek that. And that's, for me, where I spend most of my time in institutions where I work, I was concerned about increasing opportunities for people to enhance their lives, whether it was through having better housing or having better, resources for them. And so my last professional job before I was elected to the school board, I worked at a nonprofit organization where we went around the country, spending time working with nonprofits mostly, and helping them find ways to improve the services that they were providing to their communities, how to build community, and that's where that's where most of my career has been, is connected with organizations that are looking to enhance the life of the people at that ground level. I turned down the one opportunity that I had to work in the private sector, and I write about that in the book, with where General Mills was willing to offer me a position as they created a position called Vice President for Social Action. I didn't like the title, for one thing, reason why wasn't that excited about it. But I also knew that wasn't where I belonged, that I didn't think I could function in that kind of environment. But I knew that there are people who function there and do exceptionally well, and they are good people, but they are in their place. That wasn't my place. And I turned it down. Jim Summers, who was president at General Mills at the time, and others out there interviewed me for a whole day. And when I left, I said, you know, that's not for me, but I do know who it is for. And so my college roommate, I recommended him, and he got it, and he stayed there for 17 years, and he did an outstanding job. I could not have stayed there that long, because when they eliminated the position, which they did, and I told them that they would be doing that. I don't know where else I could have gone in that corporation, but my friend, when they eliminated the position, he brought other kinds of skills with him there, and he was able to survive in the corporate community. So I've always thought my mission, and the place where I belong, and where I spent all my time working, was directly with the community and institutions that serve the community, one community or another. And one of those communities that I worked in, my constituents there were prisoners, you know. But that's and I still see, to the extent that I have something else to contribute here, it is going to be you know, offering in relation to what's going on closest to home, you know, where I live, where my kids live and go to school, the grandkids and the great-grandkids, because I have great ones now. And so I'm concerned about them. I said to my I have a 10-year-old and an almost 13-year-old, two grandsons. And I was talking to them the other day, and I said, you guys look and watch and be very, pay close attention to what's going on now, because you are going to have to correct some of the stuff that we are screwing up now, that, you know, your generation will have to take it on. So watch out. And to the young people that are with us today, I said the same thing. They are the generation between my 13-year-old and them. They are the ones now that have to take on and come to these challenges and be bold, you know, about it, and don't be afraid. And don't be afraid that you're gonna, you know, wrestle some feathers. They need to be wrestled.
Paul, do you have a follow-up?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Janis.
All right. Well, T, I am just so grateful and pleased that you're here being as part of our series on restoring trust in institutions, because you have impacted so many. It's hard. I am having a hard time settling on a question about, you know, which of the many, but the story I would really love to hear more of is the impact and the just the story of the Urban Coalition and what lessons it brings to us today, because that was really such a remarkable time and remarkable organization. So I would love to hear more about that. And I have one quick question, which might or might not be related to that, but I would love to know how you settled on the name for your book, Rewind.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with that. I didn't. My daughter did.
Oh,
What happened was that, you know, I was the Minnesota Historical Society funded the project. I started out; they were funding my oral histories, and they didn't initially. They didn't want to do a book, you know, but they did say that we'll pay for we'll give you a grant for you to produce a manuscript, and then you can go wherever you want to see if you can get it published. Because they say this is what we're talking about is a memoir, and unless you're really well known, you know, a national figure of some kind, booksellers don't like to do memoirs, because they just say they don't sell unless the people are celebrities or something like that. And but there was someone over at the Historical Society, Anne Regan, and she liked the content, and she said, this is some history that needs to be told, and you're uniquely situated to tell it, so we want to support it, but nobody's going to read it the way you have been writing your manuscript. That find somebody to work with you, and we will support you in it. And my daughter had been the one doing all of my transcribing. And she had been reading what I was writing. She said, "Daddy, no one's going to read this because you write like you talk, and that people might listen to you talking, but that you put that on paper and they're not going to hang with it." So she came up with this rewind and wrote a whole paragraph, a page about the part that goes and said, "I was there when," and so on, that in the book. That I contribute that to her. Now, the Urban Coalition, I see the Urban Coalition having been one of the more consequential organizations of its time, and gets very little recognition for that. And I also see it as a movement or a quasi-movement, which means that you aren't going to know its impact in the time that it is doing stuff. You have to wait until years after and then take a retrospective look to see what you can find that you can directly connect to its presence. And that was what we did, took that retrospective look and can point to things that are standing now and doing quite well that are attributable to the Urban Coalition. And these were a group of 14 corporate executives that started out, they didn't know what they were doing or what they wanted, but they knew something needed to be done. And they were wise enough to not try to do it alone and think that they knew more than they did. They knew what they didn't know, and that was important. And so they contacted, but their strategy was to do what they always did. What they did in their corporations: look for somebody else that looks a little bit like them and ask them to go out there and give them some money to go out there and do it. Well, the person, Art Napton, was the mayor at the time, and he was pushing them. And the person, fortunately, that they went to first to talk about doing a study happens to have been a fellow that I knew and who had worked in the settlement house. In fact, I'd done a lot of work with him. He was over at public schools, had just gone over there, Larry Harris. And Larry was smart enough to say that, well, what's it going to look like if a group of rich white men employ another white man to go into the minority community and do a study? And then what if they decide that it's not feasible and we can't do it? Then he said, I'd have to leave town. And so he said he would do it on the condition that he could get me to work with him. And that was sort of because this was in 1967, and we moved here in 1965. We had been here for a little bit less than 2 years when this, just over 2 years when this happened. And I was still becoming known in town, and was not necessarily trusted by everyone, particularly some people in the Black community didn't trust me because they didn't know me. And so they agreed to engage Larry and I, and they were wise enough to listen to us as we shared with them our stories and our experiences, our collective experiences, mine from my perspective and Larry from his. And we were convincing enough to get them to take the risk to do something on an ordinary circumstance they never would have done, was to form an organization that was ungainly as the Urban Coalition, and a board of 60, and they were working in boards of their corporation. They thought a board of 10 was too big, and so, and then to say that not only do we want you to do that, but your meetings have to be open. Anybody can walk in and come to your meeting. And they thought, are you guys crazy? But we were able to sell them on that idea. Well, it didn't look like for many times that we were getting anything done. And, all throughout the whole process, didn't look like, and then began to take a look at what did get done, there's an organization called META that's in my neighborhood, really about 6 blocks from where I live in North Minneapolis, that's doing wonderful work with is the Metropolitan Economic Development Association with people of color and their business start and women, and they can point to great success there. The Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation, you know, the nonprofit housing, and then but the thing beyond that, and what I mentioned to one of the young people early on, how important getting to know and have networks and build them. The Urban Coalition, that board was one of the greatest networks that I had ever been a part of. You come and you sit at those board meetings, as frustrating and as challenging as they were, and around that big table, you'd find people sitting, you'd find the CEO of the largest corporation sitting at the board, the head table. And next to that CEO, maybe a woman that was formerly on welfare, but now had come out of it and was sitting next to the CEO of Honeywell, and all around the table like that. And then you were free when you got to that table to talk to whomever you please and cut your own deals. And a lot of that was happening. And so there are organizations, we point to PPL. Joe Savaggio was a priest at the time, would come to those meetings, and Joe didn't think much constructive was going to happen until he got there, and he began to meet people that he never would have met before. And then in doing that, then he developed networks with them so that when he had his ideas of to go do for PPL and other things, he knew who to talk to. And then likewise is that you had Peter Dorsey from the Dorsey firm at that table, and then you'd have from the way in North Minneapolis, Syl Davis, and then you had Doug Hall, who was a civil rights lawyer and everything, and Clyde Belcourt. They're sitting down together talking about representation in court for Native Americans and African Americans, and how limited things were there. And they created an organization called the Legal Rights Center, and they wouldn't have gotten together. There were no places during the ordinary work day or social life that these people were going to come together except through that urban coalition network. And once they got together, they could begin to talk about things that needed to be done, and they could do them quietly, but what was important was that the people from the corporate, these men from the corporate community had to understand was that people were not going to come and thank them for all of their greatness and the wonderful things that they were doing. What someone might come up to them and say, it should have been done a long time ago, and walk away. So they had to learn how to deal with that. And one thing that was said, I was invited after after I had left being active with the Urban Coalition. I'll never forget this, but Steve Keaton invited me to speak at a meeting at his country club. And I went there and I made my presentation and talked to him. And then at the end of it, he made some comments of how he knew me and about his experience with the Urban Coalition. And he said that he had to admit that his experience at the Urban Coalition was very frustrating, but it was the most that he learned more from that experience about really how to run his corporation than he did from any other source, because it made him look. He said he recalled that he went back to his to his job after one of those meetings, and he convened a meeting in his office of his executive, and everybody in that meeting was a white man. And he looked around and he thought, something is wrong with this. There were no women in it. There were no people of color. Everyone in it. And these were the people he would listen. he was not getting those views from that different perspective that might come from a woman or Black man or a Native American, what have you. He was getting all, they were catering to him. And he said, when he thought about it, he didn't like that. And he had to make some changes. And we noticed at that particular time, during that time, that people, those corporations began to look internally that what they were seeing was stuff that they reflecting what they were being told out in the community, that you're getting, it from right directly, what the people are giving you what you want to hear. They're stroking your ego. You need to hear something different. And it's not going to come from those people that you've got around you. You got to bring someone different to the table. And they began to do that. That's how General Mills ended up with their first Black hire for a vice president there. And sometime after that, Honeywell promoted one of their people, Chuck Johnson, to vice president. So those corporations began to look different, and their behavior began to be a little different. Now, my concern now is, a lot of institutional change took place then, and it made a difference. It truly did make a difference, regardless of what people might say.
Right.
And now we want to undo it, and I'm not sure what will happen in trying to do that, because once you can't put that thing back in the bottle. Once you put it out, it's not going to go back in quietly. And so this whole getting rid of DEI or whatever they call it, that you're not going to get rid of it. It's going to look different, and you can't not undo it and have a good outcome. Let me put it that way. Undo it, not going to produce good outcomes.
Janis, did you have a follow-up for T?
Well, my follow-up was, kind of bring it up to the today, which is what T you were just starting to do, and it feels like we need honesty and risk taking and leadership and
exactly, Janis. And if I can just maybe piggyback off of that a little bit, and then I want you to respond, and then I want to give Ipshita and Sam our last word. But how do you, some T listening to this interview tonight, none of us here, of course, but they'd say, well, it's a completely different era. We have social media, and we have fractured organizations. It's an era of immediate gratification. People are overwhelmed. They don't go to meetings anymore. People don't network the way they used to. They just hang out on their phones. And I read the advice you give at the end of the book, and to me, those lessons are timeless. But this is, I think, your question as well, Janis. Respond to the naysayers that would say, well, that was 60 years ago, T. The world's completely changed, and those lessons, those things just don't work anymore. We've got to come up with some new way to work together and solve problems, because what happened 60 years ago just can't work anymore. We don't think that, but for those who might, how do you translate, to today's era, acknowledging all of the changes I referenced and Janis referenced? How do you translate this to 2025 in a way that can help Sam and Ipshita?
Yeah, I think that what we have to do, it's going to be challenging. We can't think of this in terms of going back to something that was good. We want to go back to it. We have to look at it in such a way to say, okay, what is there about what they were doing that we can take that will hold meaning for us now in 2025? That because 1967, 68 is different from 2025, so but what is not different, I think, are of the lessons one can take away from those experiences, which means you have to begin to communicate with some of us who are still around who had some of those experiences. You know, what can we, or to look at the literature that is being produced about those experiences. What can I take away from that? And because what we have to recognize is that what is happening now is not new. It's different, but we have had those challenges before, and we came through them. That the leadership approach to the challenges are different now. There's something that we have to break through that, because we've got people now who don't believe that enough people, at least their kind of people, benefited from what took place 40, 50 years ago. And we have to find ways to show that we all benefited from that. And the thing that to me is most challenging is that we don't yet, too many of us don't yet understand how interdependent we are as people. That not only the interdependence, here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, but our interdependence takes us across, across the Atlantic and the Pacific, and takes us into many other places where strife is now. That we want to sort of having this feeling of trying to wipe other people out because they don't. We don't think we need them. To me, is very disturbing, because we need to have them do well so that we can continue to do well. And people want to come across, come into this country and stay for long periods of time because there are opportunities here. If there were similar opportunities in their homeland, they would not be as anxious to come here. They really would stay and do well where they are. So that we have to find ways of doing that. But what is happening now is that we are beginning to get rid of all of those starts that we had made in helping people do well in their places. And if we don't find a way to get back to that, I think that all of us are going to suffer from it, because we don't understand fully enough how interdependent we are in this world, this whole globe. We're living on it with others, and we are dependent upon them in some way or another. Sometimes we don't realize it, but their well-being contributes to our well-being.
Thank you, T. I'd like to give you, Ipshita, and Sammy a chance to maybe just speak for yourselves about what you have learned tonight, maybe what hopes it gives you for the future. We're going to end it with you, and then we're going to give maybe T the last word in response to what the two of you have to say. So it doesn't have to be a question. It can just be what you feel you've learned tonight and what you take from this conversation. So I'll start with you, Ipshita.
I think that this whole conversation has been incredibly meaningful and definitely opened my eyes to a lot of different perspectives. I think one of the biggest takeaways I have from our conversation here tonight would be to kind of look at our community as a whole, right? A lot of times, even, in my experience as someone who is currently in high school, there are a lot of different groups in high school, a lot of different, you'd call them cliques, and they seem very separated. But I guess in the end, realizing that we're all, part of one big community, and really bridging those gaps between people who seem so different, right? Like interdependency in a community, how how one group's well-being and how even one person's well-being can directly contribute to yourself. And so really reaching out towards others, bridging those gaps, and bringing so many different people into a room and into a table and into a conversation can work so many wonders, especially, like promote so much social good in a community. And it's like a ripple effect. And I think that was one of the most meaningful takeaways I had here tonight. Thank you so much.
That's great, Ipshita. Thank you. How about you, Sam?
Yeah, I agree with what Ipshita said. This conversation really did bring in some meaningful ideas and really gave me some insightful ideas about what we can do as a youth community. I think some of my important takeaways is one, making sure that I work with a team and that I make sure that my team is always diverse, because kind of like you, Mr. Williams, were talking about, just having those diverse perspectives really allow people to just grow as leaders and make meaningful impacts in their community. I think the second takeaway that you were talking a bit about towards the end of our conversation, just about how we can learn from the past. I think that's important because even though in the past there might have been like a lot of more in-person board meetings where people from community members to come in and talk. I think today we're taking the underlying idea and having a conversation like this, where not only are there adults of our community that's coming together for this meeting today, but also we have the opportunity for youth like me and Ipshita. So just continuing to learn from the past and building on to accommodate to our our growing world, and just our world that's getting more technologically advanced is always really helpful. So these are some of my insights. I just want to thank everyone for their time today, and this is just really cool.
Well, Ipshita, Sam, Paul, Janis, great interview panel. Thank all of you. T, thank you so, so very much. We want to give you one last chance to respond, especially to those wonderful thoughts from our future leaders. Maybe one more chance for you to plug your great book. I couldn't say it any better. I couldn't say it as well as Mr. Gilje did. It's a must read. It's a wonderful, wonderful tribute to a legacy of your service. So I'd like to just give you the last word. Any further thoughts you may have before we wrap up what really has been a great interview?
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I always enjoyed our discussions at the Civic Caucus for the past several years. The other thing I would want to say, how important it is for us to stay connected, and for us to believe that we can make a difference. I said when I was, younger and was really active in community and everything, and I found myself being the lone person of color showing up in some of these spaces, and some of the people I know raise the question, man, what difference is going to make? You're only one person. And I say back to them, never underestimate the power of one, because I'm there, and because I do bring my difference, and because part of that difference is seen, people reflect before they speak, and then I have already had an impact on the group, because they can't ignore my being there. So don't ever think that you don't, being one can make a difference. It can be a little lonely at times, but I always showed up, and part of the half of the case is showing up, because if you don't show up, then nothing's really. What happens is going to happen without your having participated. And so I appreciate the opportunity to do this, and this second time, Paul, that we have had conversations like this, and I'm pleased that people are reading my book, and that it's out there. And we are having our next event in relation to the book. Almanac is going on the 18th, Friday the 18th. I think that it's going to interview myself and my co-author, David, is going to be on with me. And then at the Major Quinn's bookstore in Uptown on the 16th of July, it's going to be a book signing there. So some of you who might live in that area want to pop in on us, we'd be glad to have you there. But and I'm trying to get in. I talked with Jade Coles, who's trying to help me get in an audience at the Minneapolis Club. That would be nice. So, well, thanks again, Paul, and the rest of you.
Congratulations again to you. Just a wonderful career, fabulous book. This will go up on YouTube, and so hopefully folks will get a chance to watch it there. Thank you to our great panel, and we'll see everybody who's following the series next on July 30th, when we'll be discussing transparency with Don Gemberling. Until then, thank you, everyone.